The new Scrum Guide is out, and there are a lot of important changes in this latest update to the Scrum Guide. If you're a Scrum practitioner, you need to stay abreast of these changes. My name is Gary On. I'm a Scrum trainer under Jeff Sutherland, and I've parsed the new Scrum Guide for you so you don't have to and can still keep up to date. There are basically 8 changes in the Scrum Guide, and the first one is one you will notice immediately when you do read the Scrum Guide. And it is that it's much shorter and much easier to understand. It has been made a lot more accessible to different audiences. The second change is that while Scrum has its origin in the software world, now the guide has gotten rid of all the terms that used to be in there that referred back to software, like testers or automatic testing or stuff like that. So because the Scrum Guide isn't only applicable to software development, but Scrum is being used almost everywhere, the guide is now reflecting that. The third change is that back then there used to be a development team, the team of people actually doing stuff, and then there used to be a larger team around that included the product owner and the Scrum Master. And so there was like an artificial boundary inside of the team. And with the new update, that is completely gone. So there's just one Scrum team. There's no development team anymore. There's just one Scrum team, and it comprises everybody on that team. So it is developers and Scrum Master and product owner. They are just one team. And I think this is a really good idea. Connected to this is change number 4. It used to be that the team was supposed to self-organize. Now it is supposed to self-manage. And there's a difference in between those two. Self-managing is encompassing more. And if you think about part 3, where we said, well, there's no development team that is self-organizing anymore, but only one Scrum team, and now the product owner and the Scrum Master are also in that team, then it makes sense to say that they're not only self-organizing, but actually self-managing, which is a little bit more. So they don't just decide on how they work on something and who works on something, as it always used to be the case. But now, since the PO is also part of the Scrum team, of the one team, it makes sense to say, well, the team is now actually deciding as a whole on what is to be done as well. So this is actually not something really new, but it makes sense to adapt it if we change the composition of the team, right? So it makes sense to broaden this a little bit. The 5th point is that this guide is less prescriptive. And what that means is Scrum is a framework, and that means it doesn't tell you everything in detail. It just lays out the groundwork. And it's important to respect that groundwork, because otherwise you will run into some problems. For example, because you're missing a feedback loop, such as talking to the customer, and suddenly you're developing very efficiently, but you're not taking into account what the market, the customer actually wants, right? So you have to respect that framework. But at the same time, the framework is just that. It lays the ground rules. It doesn't tell you exactly how you have to do stuff. And one of the examples are the famous 3 questions to be asked in the daily Scrum. So in the older versions, those 3 questions were actually in there. In the newer version, a lot of the prescriptive stuff has been thrown out. So we don't talk about the 3 questions anymore, because we don't actually care how you do the daily Scrum, as long as you fulfill its function, such as replanning the sprint if necessary, right? Removing impediments, etc., etc. So there's a function of that daily Scrum, and if you can fulfill that without asking the 3 questions, which is actually good practice, then you're good to go, and we don't need to put the 3 questions in anymore. Coming to number 6. So in the old Scrum Guide, when it came to the sprint planning, there were basically 2 questions to be answered. The first one was, what can be done in the sprint? And the second one was, how will we actually do that work that we've just decided on doing in the sprint? In the new guide, there's a 3rd question that has been added, and it is, why is the sprint valuable? And it comes before the old 2 ones. So in the sprint planning, the first thing you talk about is basically, why is what we're trying to do actually valuable? What is it bringing to the customer? Where is the business value stemming from? And then you go on to ask the old questions. And altogether you go through the 3 questions in the sprint planning now. Maybe the most surprising change in this guide is that there is a new concept, a new term, and it's called the product goal. And it kind of sounds like the sprint goal, and it has some connection with that. The product goal basically is the vision of the product. Where do you want to go? What's the future state of the product that we want to aim for and that we can plan towards, right? So we have an app right now, it's in this state, and we have a vision for how it's supposed to be later. And that's the product goal. That's where we want to get to. And now that we have that goal in mind, we can actually use the sprints to plot and get closer and closer towards that goal. And it's important to understand that there can only be one product goal. And if you want to change it, you either have to accomplish that goal or you have to abandon it, which is both okay, but it's important to just chase one goal. And another way of thinking about it is that if you're building an increment, well, that's just basically taking another step towards that product goal, right? With every increment, you get closer and closer to the product goal. And closely connected to that is our last point, number 8, and it is making commitments clearer. And what that means is think back to the old guides, and we would always have such concepts as the sprint goal or the definition of done. And they were kind of like up in the air, right? They were very important. Everybody knows that we need them, but they weren't quite artifacts, and we didn't really know like where to fit them in. Are they an artifact? Are they not? And so now everything has been structured a lot better. So right now there is a home for these different concepts. We have the 3 artifacts, the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. And now each one of those has a commitment to it, which serves to describe what is actually needed for that artifact. So if we look at the product backlog first, what's the commitment? Well, it's the product goal that we just talked about, right? They are closely connected, and one of the is the commitment for the other. Maybe that's not quite clear yet because the product goal is a new concept, but think about the sprint backlog, our second artifact. The sprint goal is the commitment for the sprint backlog, right? That's what we commit to, so we get the sprint backlog done, right? And it's the same for the increment. The increment is an artifact, and its commitment is the definition of done. We need the definition of done. That's our commitment to work with on the increment. And so this is kind of like cleaning house a little bit, structuring it better. And it only works because now we have the product goal and now everything fits nicely together. So these 8 changes are, in my view, the most important ones. Keep in mind, you can always read the Scrum Guide at scrumguides.org. We at TeamFlow also had a professional narrator read the new Scrum Guide out for you because some people just prefer listening over reading, and it's easier to do if you're on the road, for example. So I'm gonna put a link in the description down below so you can find the narrated version of the Scrum Guide. And yeah, if you want to learn more about Scrum, get better at your Scrum practice or Agile practice, hit the subscribe button and we'll send you a new video every week.